What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands. And this time, hopefully, we got a little more to analyze than we did last time around.
He enjoys being away from poker, as we have been told, and he enjoys poker now more when he plays less. It just was too much of a grind the 7 or 8 years that he was doing it day in and day out.
So maybe we're getting some information that Mustafa Knit is #1 on the Italy all-time list. But if Sammartino finishes 3rd or better, he'll overtake him for #1. So I wonder if Mustafa Knit is actually anti-sweating him. He's like, I hate that guy. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to cheer for his opponents.
Around that.
Maahs, ace, jack of spades. Been balancing his delay, but not quite as well as we think maybe he should. He seemed to act quicker with a hand. And maybe we're totally giving away tells. I'm sorry.
It's just kind of odd because Maahs has taken a lot of time when he's clearly going to fold, so that could really never give off a tell. He's quick when he's about to play a hand. That's it. That's all we know.
Do you have an idea of how much longer we're playing today?
So Kai now in the small blind, king 7 after the raise from Maahs. And it looks like Kai wants to get busy.
Poor Kai. Every spot he takes, every open he makes, he gets 3-bet. Every spot he takes, his opponent has a hand.
Is this a Police song?
Every move you make. And people use that for their wedding song, and Sting is so upset about it. He says, it's a stalking song, people.
Yeah, that's pretty odd. That's the soundtrack for the restraining order signing that we had.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now the 3-bet back to Maahs from Kai. And Maahs, yeah, can put big pressure on Kai because he has Zen covered.
And it's another small 3-bet. I feel like it's contagious. When someone makes a small 3-bet, everyone goes, this is the 3-bet size, it's small. Out of position, especially with a hand this weak, when you haven't 3-bet yet, you could just elect to use a bigger sizing.
He just calls.
No one would notice.
He just calls.
Our hand, once again, is going to be at the World Series of Poker main event final table. This time, we're down to 6. And before we take a look at the hand, I want to discuss the payouts just briefly so you can get a little idea of what's at stake. With 6 players left in the main event, we can see that 6th place here is $1.85 million, 5th $2.2, 4th $3, 3rd $4, 2nd $6, and 1st place is a whopping $10 million. So payouts are about to start ramping up. If we look at the stacks of the table, Enson and Gates are by far in the best positions here, both having over 150 million chips, and everyone else being relatively short stacked. This is the dream scenario for the big stack. Basically, you get to push these guys around while they try and jump up pay jumps. You're still just playing for first place. Action begins at 600K, 1.2 million, and the action folds around to Kevin Maahs on the button, who looks down at ace-jack suited. I want to make a quick note that you should typically be raising less buttons as there are less people at the table, which is contrary to popular belief. A lot of times I see when playing a tournament gets down to 3 or 4 handed, people start to play a lot more hands on the button. That doesn't really make sense because usually the ante ends up being smaller relative to the big blind. So for example, when you play an online tournament, you would actually want to open tighter on the button than you would when it was full ring. The World Series of Poker used to be like that, but it's not anymore. They moved over to the big blind just pays the full ante. So because of that, you're going to want to be wider on the button than you might be in a more traditional tournament. Anyway, you want to cut it, ace-jack suited is a premium hand and is definitely going to be an open on the button, which Kevin decides to do to the tune of $2.7 million. Now, this is standard, but the hand's about to go a little bit off the track. In the small blind, Zen looks down at king 7 offsuit, a hand you can definitely just fold. In fact, when you're in the small blind facing a button open, you're traditionally going to want to play something in the vicinity of 15, 20, 25% of your hands. Given that there is an ante, I might play a little bit closer to the 20-25 side, but it's also reasonable to play a bit on the more conservative. This hand isn't anywhere near any of those area codes, so you can just fold it. Just to play devil's advocate for a minute, if you 3-bet here, it does put a lot of pressure on the button because if you double through him, he's going to be in last place by a lot. However, if he decides to jam here, he puts tons of pressure back on you. So in this situation, a lot of times the person that gets to go all in last ends up having the biggest advantage because they have the most fold equity. Either way, King 7 is just not a hand you need to use. And look, sometimes you've been folding for a while and you just want to make a move. That's not the time to do it. Poker works like this. Sometimes you have a bunch of good hands. Sometimes you never get good hands. Just play your ranges and don't sweat what's been happening lately. I feel like sometimes, I'm not saying this is for sure what happened here, but sometimes people just feel like they gotta try and make a play to make things happen. You really don't. Just wait for the right spot with the right hand. Anyway, Zen does decide to re-raise to about 7.7 million. I think this is really an okay size. I think that anything in the 8 million range makes a lot of sense. He's got 36 million. If he goes much higher than 8, he's going to be committing too much of his stack. So, maybe if we were deeper stacked, I'd like a bigger size, but I think this is in the right ballpark given the stack sizes in play. Back over to Kevin with ace-jack suited, and I think in this situation, you've got a pretty clear call. This hand's going to make a lot of money by calling. You have a strong hand. It's suited. A lot of the suited hands do better when you call raises because you have more playability on different board textures, given you can have flush draws and backdoor flush draws. So I think in this situation, I mainly lean towards a call. If you want to put in a few looser jams against the small blind re-raise, I think that's okay too, particularly because of the pressure you put on him. But I'd rather use some hands that have less equity when calling and relatively similar equity versus the all-in call range. So maybe I would use a hand like ace-queen offsuit or ace-jack offsuit if I wanted to jam, and I like calling with the suited variety. Anyway, Kevin agrees, decides to call, and let's take a flop.
Yeah, I mean, that is a hand, even versus a small sizing, yes, it does make it look more attractive to just call. You're like, okay, it's not too expensive. But I think I would just pile it in. You raise from the button and the small blind 3-bet you. That's going to happen over and over again. It's a dynamic that you're going to see a lot. You have ace-jack suited on the button way above your button opening range. Perfectly fine to just 4-bet it in and steal that raise.
And Maahs got lucky as he puts Zen Kai under a microscope with Kai having to act now out of position. And he took control pre-flop.
Yeah, and this 3-bet that Kai elected to take, once he c-bets this board, I think he's probably just going to take it down.
So based on the bet sizing, Kai holds the power right here, you're thinking, because he has the action here with that flop?
Just taking the betting lead, yes. When you take the lead of the hand and you 3-bet from the small blind, you're representing a really strong range of hands.
And he has to do that.
Even though this board is a low board, you have all the big pairs in your range, and your opponent by flatting just doesn't. So I think that Kai c-betting this should just get it done.
All in?
All in?
Just the suicide all in, but this is a spot where I shouldn't say Maahs has no very strong. He could have traps in his range. It's going to be a small part of his range where he says, "Okay, I have aces or kings. Let's see what this guy does if I flat here."
Well,
but you know, it's
look
hard
at this,
to have aces or
no,
kings.
and Kai's got to feel pretty good about what he sees from Kevin Maahs right now.
Even if you feel like you're good here, it's just so hard to click call with ace-jack suited with no piece of this board. He's regretting not 4-bet jamming.
I know I'm good, exactly, yeah. We missed a bet.
Another 1 hour 20 or 28 1. That's what I get.
Whichever comes first.
This is the one game where you can know your pockets are being picked, and you just can't do that much about it. You're not going to hero call with ace high, right? At the main event final table for most of your stack.
This is when they say either A, so sick, B, so gross.
Every time he comes up with the mic.
Well, a hero call would be even more impressive than this bluff shove.
The flop comes 6-5 deuce with 2 clubs. Now, there's a couple ways you can play this here in the small blind. Given that you have king 7, the king of clubs, and a 7, I think we very clearly have a flop bet. You block your opponent from having the second nut flush draw by having the king of clubs. And additionally, you're going to get a lot of turns and rivers that you can have some playability on. You have an open ender on an 8. You have top pair on a 7 or king. You have a good flush draw on a club. You have an open ender on a 3. There's actually a lot of turns that you can make plays on, or you have equity now, or you have even a strong hand now. For all of those reasons, I like a bet. What I also like about a bet is if you bet here and have to fold to a jam, you don't care. You just have 2 overcards. I mean, how often can you really have king 7 offsuit here? You can't. One interesting aspect of these very low boards, though, is that sometimes it makes sense to use all-ins. And the reason is pretty simple. Let's say I have a hand like pocket 10s. Well, in that spot, I don't really want to bet very small and let my opponent catch up to an overpair or an overcard that can beat my top pair, or rather beat my overpair to the board. So on these boards, this is something I used to do in heads up and 4-bet pots back in the day. I think it can make sense to have a small size that you use with some bluffs, maybe some hands like this one, as well as some very strong overpairs. And then an all-in size with a few draws, maybe an occasional overcard type hand, and some of your overpairs that are more vulnerable. I think of hands like, 10s without a club here as a hand that might want to use that size as well, where you can stack those pairs that are lower as well as some draws, and maybe the occasional hand like ace-6 or ace-5 suited. Zen also likes the use of a large size because that's what he's going to do right here. So this can't be that bad. He's going to get a lot of folds. His opponent can have plenty of sort of suited Broadway hands. And when he does get called, he's probably going to have some equity. Yeah, once in a while he's up against like ace-jack of clubs and he's in a very bad spot. Well, really once in a while he's up against a hand like a set or a trapped overpair pre. But all in all, he's going to get a large chunk of folds here. This is a pretty good board for the 3-better. All of your overpairs are still going to be good. There aren't many hands that could be suited connected type hands that would flat preflop that hit this board. And you could really realistically have some hands like that in the small blind, like 4-3 suited or some low pairs. So I think this is a spot that definitely favors the small blind all in all. Facing this jam, Kevin really hates his life. He feels like his opponent is bluffing, but what can he do? He just has ace-jack high. I mean, even if his opponent was doing this with a bluff like ace-king or ace-queen, he'd be toast. The only way it could be good is if his opponent has really a stone air ball or some kind of draw that still has a lot of equity. And unfortunately, when that's the case, your hands are tied.
I gotta believe it's 0% chance he's
It's
calling
like,
here.
to me, it seems outside the realm of possibility, but he outlasted 8,000 people to get here. You've done some crazy things along the way, most people.
I'm gonna need a minute, guys.
I assume he's gotten some info on what Zen's been opening.
But opening and 3-betting is so different.
You're right. Yep.
It could be useful to know that every time Kai has opened, he's been 3-bet. If you are thinking about that, then like, I expect even the strongest man to break at some point, right? You're like, okay, this is so frustrating. I'm just going to 3-bet and go nuts in this hand. It can happen, but
Unlikely.
I think even if you feel like that's happening, it's
You
still
can't
so
pull the
hard
trigger.
to call here.
But if Maahs does, as you saw Tony Miles looking in on his buddy who was all in here, Maahs would be ahead. Yeah, so many things could go wrong on the turn and river for Maahs. But right now, 28 million chips are being offered up to him by Zen Kai.
This is just a wild hand by Zen Kai. I don't know if I've ever seen a hand exactly like this. The amount of risk taking, from 3-betting this hand from the small, and then to over pot jam is crazy to me. He's the guy who's taking the advice, though, that this first pay jump isn't that big. It's all at the top.
Clock's been called.
Been called. We'll have an additional 30 seconds. I'll count down the final 5 seconds of that. Your clock does start now.
Kevin's got 30 seconds.
Good bluff.
And he folds. A good bluff indeed.
Bluff shove, 6-handed at the main event.
Even though this bluff worked, in my opinion, it still wasn't a very good play. You can't just look and see if something worked or not and make that and let that decide for you if it's good or bad. And that's really the difference between good players and bad players. Bad players might see this and think, oh, so I should do bluffs like this. No, you shouldn't. Play your ranges and you're going to win the money in the long run. Thanks for joining me for today's episode of Poker Hands. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button and I'll see you again soon.